always knew I wanted to be a lawyer since I was like 12 years old. Sounds very cliche, but it's true. I Asma Jahangir was kind of my guiding force as a kid, and I saw how, despite being a woman, she always fought for people, fought for minorities in the country, gave people a voice, amplified other people's voices, even though despite all the cultural constraints, all the societal constraints that she faced, and that was always kind of my guiding force. I didn't know much beyond that. Like when I was a kid, how do you do that? Where do you go from there? But I knew that I wanted to be just like her, and I knew I had to study really hard if I was ever going to have a chance. So that kind of motivated me to work hard. Got into LSE. I did a dual degree program. So I got into LSE law. I did a special program where you do 2 years of your undergrad degree and then you can apply to Columbia for a JD. So I applied in my second year, Alhamdulillah, got in. And then this year was my first year at Columbia. But yeah, academically, it's been a whirlwind. I also got a public interest, public service fellowship at Columbia, which has been an incredible experience so far. Next year is going to be my last year, and then I'm going to be a lawyer basically. And my future plans basically include hopefully staying in the US for a while, pursuing public interest work, and then inshallah coming to Pakistan one day. And the goal is to set up my own legal aid clinic. And yeah, that's me. I think one of the most difficult things to grasp as young people and as young lawyers is the fact that, we kind of see the law as this tool for justice. And we think that, when people are in front of the law, everything is fair, everything is equal, but that's actually not the case. It's a very big divide. How you're treated by the law, it's going to depend on what your resources are, what the color of your skin is. And that's true, sadly, for Pakistan, that's true for the US, and it's true for most countries. A rich, privileged person going to the legal courts in Pakistan is going to have a very different outcome because of the level of resources that they have. Like if you're in a criminal trial, you're going to have the very best lawyer. If it's a land dispute, whatever the case is, the outcome is usually very different. Most of the reasons why people in Pakistan or even in the US, from the systems that I've studied, the problem of mass incarceration comes from the fact that the problem is poverty and our solution is to lock people up. We never think about why are people committing crimes. We often think, okay, this person's done a bad thing, and the automatic outcome should be to just lock them up without giving them any access to actual lawyers who can explain their rights to them. Where I come into this picture is I want to make affordable, quality legal services available to the masses, whether that be my work in Pakistan in the future, and in the short term, the work that I've been doing in the US. This past summer, I worked on a death penalty case while I was at Columbia. When you think about death penalty, when you think about a criminal, your automatic response is, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to help that case, right? And personally, my views on the criminal justice system have also evolved a lot. When I was younger, I kind of saw all of the bad things happening in Pakistan, and I was like, I want to be a prosecutor. I want to put people in prison. As the girl that I am today, as a 22-year-old young adult who wants to go into the legal profession, I can't even imagine pursuing that because I've really seen how the system works and what it does to people. Our criminal justice system really dehumanizes a person, and I don't think that prison is the answer. And that's a huge, I think, development from the person that I was when I was younger and I wanted to be a lawyer. Now I want to help people avoid the system. I want to help give people better outcomes. We always say this, but I kind of define myself as a lawyer who hopes that there's no need for lawyers like me in the future. So I think Jabran Nasir is somebody that I admire so much. Like I can't even say it in words. I think how incredible of a man he is. I was very lucky that he was speaking at an event in UCL, and I just got the opportunity to speak to him very, very informally, like kind of ask him all the questions that I always wanted to ask him. The thing that really I admire about him is the fact that he's always, despite the fact that he could easily join a major political party and get the votes that he wants, for him it's never been about getting into power. It's always been about using that power to amplify other people's voices and to use that position for change. Like he's never ever been about himself. And that, obviously, I don't know him at a personal level, but that's something that's always come across. I think a lot of the critiques that people say about him is that, oh, he's not realistic. He could maybe achieve a lot more change if he did kind of join PTI or PMLN and actually get elected. That, because that's honestly, realistically speaking, one of his only chances in a country like Pakistan. But I always say to those people that if he did do that, I probably would respect him less, because somebody who, despite all the obstacles that they face, despite all the struggle that they've had, hold on to their values. Yes, that's idealistic, but I think that's the kind of people that we need in this country. In my interview, he talked about all the relief work that he's done. When the floods happened in Karachi, he was at the forefront of that work. He's also still a human rights lawyer, and he does a lot of he just still takes on a lot of active cases. UCL event that he spoke at before I got the chance to interview him, there was actually somebody in the audience. She had a question and she talked about how the struggles she's faced in Pakistan, and he didn't even answer her question. He just goes like, I want you to come on stage and tell everyone about your experiences as a minority in Pakistan, because most people don't get to hear that experience. It's your story to tell, it's not my story to tell. And I think that's what I really respect about him, as even as a feminist ally, because a lot of men in Pakistan, a lot of men all over the world, they kind of try to dominate that narrative and give less voices to the women whose experiences that they're talking about. And I've never seen Gibran do that. And that's one of the things that I really admire about him. So I think Raber actually got the idea because I've noticed even when I was navigating the college process, I noticed how unfair how concentrated the lack of resources are. I feel like, kids shouldn't feel like they don't have the same opportunities, which is that you can only get to a good place if you're going to some exorbitantly high college counseling service. And I feel like, education is the only way that we can actually achieve real social mobility, because the work that NGOs and charities do is very important. But if you want to make an actual difference in someone's life, you have to give them the tools to empower themselves, which is education. So I was just thinking about how, children like me who've already kind of undergone the college admission process, we know how rigorous it is. We know what the tips and tricks are. We all want to help. Why don't we kind of create a network where we can pool all of those resources together and actually connect with some of the kids who aren't able to kind of go to all of these big counseling services? So that's kind of what the idea was. And I had so many friends, like I want to give a shout out to Misha, Momina, Asmer, like all of those people who've really put in so much effort to make Raber an actual thing. And we've, alhamdulillah, like we were able to match over 100 kids with, college, with mentees who had already were basically offering their services pro bono, working with them because they were generally passionate about helping these kids achieve their full potential, and we don't want anything more than just seeing these kids succeed. And we hope that that message kind of, when you're in college, you pass that on to other kids, and hopefully Raber becomes something even bigger than it is now. Yeah, so first, like I think how I started writing was more just kind of, as a kid, I felt very helpless about everything that I saw around me, and I felt like I couldn't do much, but I could use my voice to talk about these issues. Because one thing that's true, especially in Pakistani circles, is that especially when you go to like a privileged school, you have, like you live in an elite bubble where most people don't take the time to inform themselves about the real Pakistan, and all of us are guilty of it to some extent. And I was like, I wanted to educate myself as much as I could and talk about it as much as I could. And NGB came into my life, which was also an incredible experience, a huge part of my life. But that's just how my poetry started. I can remember, I think the first time that I actually wrote something and published it was when the Peshawar attacks happened, I believe. And it was just something that I could not express into words how upset I felt, how disappointed I felt. And it was a huge tragedy for all of us. And I wanted to kind of articulate that somehow. And then I think my poems about about feminism, about even Kashmir, it was just kind of me trying to raise awareness about what's happening in the world. More recently, about what's happening in Palestine. I think there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much bias that we have to counteract. So if I can kind of play even a small part in that, I feel like I should. And specifically, womanhood was inspired by this year's Aurat March. Like I was just thinking about, I was in New York. I was feeling a huge part of, why can't I be there? And I just wanted to kind of contribute somehow. And I was very much thinking about my own memories as a kid. And the first line of the poem is, girls can't be both beautiful and smart. And that was inspired by something that someone said to me. It's something that I heard my whole life. All of us kind of unlearn misogyny as we grow older. And I was like, you know what, just, that's bullshit. Women can be whatever they choose to be, and that's kind of the message behind womanhood. You don't have to fit into a certain depiction of what society tells you have to be yourself, be loud, be proud. So that's kind of what inspired that poem. So I think for me, patriotism has always been about working to make your country better. And I think a lot of people, I've even written a poem about this, I think, where how we often kind of confuse patriotism with nationalism and blindly loving your country, ignoring its faults, which I don't think is patriotism. I think it's closing your eyes. And it often stems from privilege because, it's like only people who have okay, relatively easy lives in Pakistan will say, ke, haan, like, like, humne to burai nahi karni. Patriotism is actually criticizing your country, raising awareness about what's going on in your country for the majority of people, except for the selected few, and working to actually change those narratives, amplify people's voices. And like, I think the biggest problem with doing that kind of work is that you're kind of labeled as a traitor or somebody who's against Pakistan. And I think we really need to counteract that narrative because nothing is going to change until we start raising our voices. For me, Pakistan means home, Pakistan means family. I feel like I'm very grateful that I live in a country like Pakistan where there's it's given us a lot of societal baggage, but it's also given us a culture that I'm extremely proud of. Girls cannot be both beautiful and smart. Girls cannot be both beautiful and smart. A boy told me this in middle school. Back then, I wasn't sure which category he thought I fell in. All I know was that in that moment, I cared much more about what was on my face than I did about what was in my brain. I didn't even think to disagree with him or tell him that he was wrong, that no, women are so much more than that. We are beautiful and we are smart, but we are also resilient as hell. That story sticks out to me because it was the first time someone tried to tell me what womanhood is meant to be. How we can only ever be one of two things. How men perceive us is more important than how we perceive ourselves. I was 12 years old when the men in my life started policing what I could and could not wear. You are told that if you abide by society's standards, if you just listen to the men in your life, you don't dress a certain way, then you will be shielded from the male gaze. While I can't speak for everyone, I know my dupatta never did the trick. But hey, maybe I was doing it wrong. It's my fault. It has to be. You see, it is the men who decide which women are respectable and which ones aren't. They convince you that it is those other women who are your enemy. Just don't be like them. We'll protect you. And I say this especially to the well-intentioned men. You are not protecting her when you force her to quit her job when the men at work won't stop catcalling. You are not protecting her when you tell her 7 baje ke baad ghar se nahi nikalna. You are caging her. You are teaching her that to be woman is somehow less than. Womanhood means different things to different women. But every woman I know has a story. Means I am afraid every time I walk alone at night. Or at worst, take an Uber and risk getting harassed by the man driving it. I am tired of asking for respect. I am tired of asking to feel safe. And I am so tired of the Me Too's. I am tired of a world which pushes us down, crumbling, and then asks us to get back up on our feet only to compete with the so-called other women. It takes some of us a lifetime to learn one very simple lesson. Other women are not your enemy. They are your strongest allies and biggest cheerleaders. So to the girl reading this, I hope you know that you are both beautiful and smart. And to hell with anyone who says otherwise.